This podcast is going to go into the next two levels within the field of ecology. We looked at in our last podcast populations and how populations can increase and decrease. This podcast will be looking at the next two levels, which are communities and ecosystems. So we've defined these before already as communities, including an assemblage of populations that live close to each other in an area. So it's all the living things. So here in this image here, we have flowers, insects, anything that lives in this area would be part of the community. Now again, not the non-living stuff in that area, that's ecosystem. But here we are looking at just all the living stuff that's found there. So in evaluating communities, we can look at um, ways of looking at their characteristics. And one of the characteristics of a community is how many species live there. So that tells us something. And then also the diversity of that species, which we call um, relative abundance. So species diversity is how many different species, and then um, also the term relative abundance and species richness are terms that um, tell us more about that. For instance, let's look at this right here. Okay, so in this population, we have um, we have a bunch of these trees right here. We got a couple of these, we got one of those and one of those. So that tells us a little bit. We got four different species. Um, two, three, four, yeah. And in this one, we have the same number of species, but it's more even distributed. So right here is a diagram of that. This is that first one we looked at, 80% of these trees, 10 of those, 5 of those, 5 of those. And that second one we looked at even distribution all the way around. And so that tells us our relative abundance. And that gives us more, a better picture of kind of what's going on there, when we look at that. So those are just kind of ways of describing the biodiversity that's in these communities. Now, within these communities, we have, let's see, let's look at the development. We're going to come back and look at that. Okay, we have a lot of interactions that take place in these communities, and the interactions can be everything from predation. So we mentioned that in our outline. Predation leads to a lot of different types of characteristics being expressed because of survivability and then passing on those genes. But anyway, it's a major interaction in the communities that we talk about. And some of these predators are what's called keystone predators. And a keystone predator is one that helps to keep a balance. Basically, you can think about it. It's kind of like an arch. We have a diagram. Yep. All right. So in this arch right here, we have this stone. It's a very important stone because if we took it away, the whole thing would crumble down. And so that's what it's talking about when it says a keystone species. It's usually an animal that if you took it out, other things are going to fall and have a ripple effect and be affected. So this sea star is a keystone predator. It feeds off of different mollusks and things like that, and keeps their numbers down so that the other animals can live in that community as well. And so um, predation is a very common interaction that we see between uh, between different species in an area. So other types of interactions, so that predation is just one. So predation is one where one's benefited and the other is harmed. You have the predator, he's benefited, he gets food. Then you have the prey, he is the food, so he's harmed. So we put a negative for the effect if they're harmed, a positive if they're benefited. All right, so other types of relationships in these communities would include parasitic. Of course, parasitic is going to be kind of the same. You have one that's benefited, the parasite, and you have one that's harmed, the host. Herbivores, same thing. But then we have these cases where we have mutualistic relationships. This is where one's benefited and the other is benefited. And that would be like the bacteria that live in the gut of the hippo. They help to break down that plant material that it feeds off of. We have bacteria in our gut as well. And so they benefit by living close to each other, plus plus. That's called mutualistic relationship. And then we have commensalistic relationship. We mentioned that one in our outline here. This is where two or more species rely on, this is where the partner benefits without negatively affecting the other one. And so a commensalistic relationship would be, well, let me think of it. An example would be like barnacles that live on a whale. The barnacles are benefited because as the whale swims around, it gets to filter feed through more area and it gets food, so it benefits and so it stays there. The whale is completely neutral. So if we were going to put it up here on this chart, we would put a 0 there because it wouldn't be a negative or it wouldn't be a plus. That's called commensalistic relationship, commensalism, and we mentioned that in the outline. The next thing we mentioned in our outline is looking at the role that energy plays as we look at this. And so basically animals get their energy by eating, so they either eat plants or other animals. And so we look at this specific roles of energy transfer in the community. We can put all animals into one of three categories. We have producers, consumers, decomposers. So your producers are your plants. They're the bottom of the food chain. They get their energy from the sun. So here shows two examples, a terrestrial habitat and an aquatic marine habitat. So in this, you got your producers first get that energy in, and then you got your primary consumers, they eat that. Then you got your secondary, they eat that. Tertiary, they eat those. And then your quaternary, as you move up to this higher level, we call these trophic levels. Trophic levels. So we have those different levels, and this is called a food chain, and looking at kind of who eats who. But really probably a better picture of that would be what's called a food web. And this is a food web here, and it's really because usually animals feed off of more than just one thing, so just a straight line food chain doesn't really depict what all's going on. So a food web kind of shows everything that they eat and kind of points to all the different stuff in these different levels that work our way up. So food web is a better depiction of what's happening out there. Okay, the next thing we look at in our outline there is about the recycling of nutrients in these communities. So nutrients are recycled. You know, we have our energy recycled there by the food webs, but we also have other things that are recycled that are very important. So this shows the cycling of nutrients through the producer decomposer food webs. Other things that are recycled are things like water. We have the cycling of water in the water cycle. Water cycle or hydrological cycle, water is picked up over the ocean, gets into air masses, moves over to the land, precipitates, and comes back. So we have this continual movement of water. That's an important cycling in these communities. Another cycling is nutrients like nitrogen. This shows the cycling of nitrogen through the breakdown through bacteria that help make it available to plants, and then it gets into animals that feed off of that, and then it gets back down into through decomposition back down into the soils where it gets into plants. So the recycling of that is nitrogen. Another one that's already looked at that one. Here's carbon. Carbon is recycled. We breathe out carbon. Plants take it in. So that's our connection is plants and animals, the carbon dioxide being recycled. We've added to that carbon by the burning of fossil fuels, so it's up there. And so that's the carbon cycle. All those things are cycled in these communities, and those are very important things. Um, Oh, I meant to mention this. This is looking at those different, in that food chain that we just talked about. We have these different levels, and energy levels are very high at the bottom of those food chains or food webs, whatever. The producer level has much more energy. Only 10% makes it up to the next trophic level. And that's an important thing. So getting that energy up to the top is we need a lot of energy down at the bottom in order to get that energy up to the top, and that's called a pyramid because it looks like that, and only a small amount gets to the top. Let's see. Okay, next in the outline we talk about cycling. We talk about the development of these communities. Okay, and so these communities develop at a in a stage-like fashion. And the development of a community is called succession. And so that's community development is succession. All right, succession, if it's happening originally, is called primary. Secondary succession is when there's some kind of disturbance that wipes out a community and it has to start over, basically. And so here is our succession stages. So we start in this, which is a terrestrial habitat. We start with stages of small annual plants, and then we move to the next stage and the next stage. So we move up through these stages, softwood trees and then our hardwood trees, until we reach this, what's called a climax community, and that's the end process, and we've reached the end at that point. So that takes place through time. And again, primary succession is when this is happening originally, and then secondary succession is when it happens after a disturbance. All right. And so that's where we end for that podcast. And our next lecture is going to go into some practical applications of understanding these things, and that is conservation biology and trying to protect and look at the biodiversity that's on Earth.